Hi! I do miss my schnauzer pepper. That's really sad. Okay, so hi, my name is Linda Dong. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a design evangelist at Apple. I hope you've been having a great time at Clarity. I've been having a blast meeting all of you and chatting with you and nerding out about design systems. I love it. Let's keep going. So today, what I'd like to share is a little bit about Apple's perspective on how we approach our design system, the HIG, in our design guidance. And hopefully, I'm also here to share a little bit about how you can approach making design systems that live on our platforms. And to do that, we are going to roll back time a bit, 4 decades ago to 1977. So what was going on in 1977? Well, Star Wars had just premiered in theaters for the first time. Jimmy Carter became president of the United States. And to be totally honest, I don't actually know which of those two guys is Jimmy Carter. Everyone's favorite design tool, the Post-it note, is invented. And so was the mullet. And also in 1977 is when Apple released the Apple II. So that was Apple's actually, it was the first personal computer ever to support color monitor displays. And with it came the first draft of the Human Interface Guidelines, or the HIG, as we like to call it for short. So just to kind of like level set for me, how many people have read the HIG, know what it is, used it? Great, great, great. OK, love to see hands. Fantastic. So what was the HIG's purpose back then? Well, 1977, you have to remember that computers and screens and digital interfaces were a completely new concept for people. And basically, Apple had to explain to everyone how to use all of this new technology through an interface design that was clear and friendly and approachable. But at the same time, we, and I mean like a royal we here because I wasn't born at this point, but we, Apple, had to approach external software developers and really sell them on this idea that if they adopted our design system, that we would all benefit from a coherent experience and a familiar experience, and everyone would start using our stuff more. And back then, that was a very controversial thing to pitch, making someone use our design system. And sometimes I actually feel like it still is just as much as a controversy. So the way that we did it is we educated and argued for adopting our platform design system through the HIG. And the HIG has always been meant for an external audience rather than an internal one. So it's never really been about documenting exactly, what Apple's own visual identity is so that other people can replicate it. Instead, what it really sought to do was to get people really bought into the higher level design philosophies that we had, and to really teach people the reasonings behind why we suggest certain design patterns. And so these philosophies and principles kind of basically existed since the first edition, like the concept of consistency, which I know we are all very familiar with, but again, very novel at the time. And it went that effective applications are both consistent within themselves and consistent with one another. And how do you achieve that? Of course, standardized components. It also introduced the concept of metaphor. So by using metaphors from the real world, like the idea of a desktop or files that you put into folders, people can more easily predict how your interface will behave. And the concept of forgiveness, which is my favorite, that people or users make mistakes in life and software, and you should forgive them. You should let people back away from actions or undo actions that they've taken. And of course, clarity. So I had to add this one in. And basically that said that good design begins with an understanding of the situation the user is in or of the problem being solved. And if you use clear visual cues and plain language, you'll be able to just enable people to do what they want to do. Okay. Also, as I was just looking through old scans of the HIG, I think I found one of the first pieces of documentation on our favorite component, the button. And the thing that I wanted to mention here is just how much the HIG is always focused on usability rather than visual identity. So if you look here, it doesn't say, oh, Apple's buttons have this corner radius and their size and this color, and your buttons have to have this corner radius and this size and this button. So instead, what it goes through is, what about a button does that enable people to do? Does it make sense to use a button for your purpose? And if so, here are some of the ways that we have found you can design buttons in order to make them more usable. And so a lot of these principles we still carry on today. Time is a flat circle. So even though a lot of these principles were written almost 4 decades ago, they are just as relevant now as they were then. And I'm sure a lot of these principles also feel very familiar to you all, and perhaps even like a little bit second nature. But we still champion them at Apple, and that's because every day we have to work with folks who are not a part of the design field, who don't have this type of background, and designers right now are collaborating so much with folks who aren't in traditional design roles and who don't have the education on some of these principles. And then, so throughout this time, the goal of the HIG has remained the same. We're here to basically teach people from any background how to be really good design practitioners and to be the definitive resource for making designs feel at home on Apple platforms. And that isn't to say we haven't evolved our guidance during that time. So we've done countless iterations of the HIG. I think the first version I read was like the 2007 one. And within that, there have been plenty of moments where what we've written hasn't held up over time. Like when we told everyone to beware of the color blue, the most illegible color, according to us, at some point in the 80s. And to be fair, I think that that was probably a byproduct of the hardware at the time. I just think it's really hilarious considering our system color is defaulted to blue. Or there are times where we have just developed our understanding on a topic, like the cultural associations of color. So as we were designing for a more global audience, we recognized there are plenty of cultures that don't associate red with stop, or error, or failure, or disk access in progress, don't remove the disk or turn it off. And that is something that we're really sensitive to within our product design now. So for a quick example, if you look at our stocks app, in China, we actually represent our gains in red and our losses in green because we know that red has such a positive connotation for that culture. And then there are situations where we and the community are just ready to graduate from an existing paradigm. And that was the story with skeuomorphism, which I was a part of. Did anyone else do skeuomorphic design? Yeah. All right, so we were rendering out Corinthian leather. We were making like glass shelves and like wood bookcases. And at the time, it served its purpose, and that was to educate folks on using these newfangled like touch screens and being able to have a metaphor to understand what the use was. But eventually, we all just sort of reached a point where we really didn't need to rely on heavy-handed metaphors anymore. Our customers and the people using our stuff just got it, and so we at Apple moved on, we encouraged the community moved on, and everyone moved on. And so in these examples, it isn't necessarily like, oh, the HIG was wrong at that moment, and like the newest edition is the only right one. It was just that our guidance is relevant for a specific time and a specific context. And this is how we update our guidance over time. So we really pay attention to when things become second nature, become collective knowledge within the community and to the people using our stuff. And when we recognize that, we update our own design language and do that as our beliefs evolve and as the practice of design matures. Which takes us to this year, 2022. And this is when we just actually launched a major restructure of the HIG once again. So before I get into that, I actually want to set a little bit of context and share how we're sort of structured internally and the scale at which we do things. So the HIG as an entity is not owned by a single team at Apple. We are a very small, sort of ever-changing group of people from many different places within the company. At its core, we are made up of design evangelism, which is the team that I'm on, and we focus on education and outreach, and also being advocates for the community. And we work with developer publications who write the HIG. So one of the folks on developer publications, Catherine, she has been writing for the HIG for like the last 16 years, which I think is amazing. And together, we curate and edit all the content that goes into our design guidance. And we do that by partnering very closely with individual designers from our human interface team. And those are folks who work on the designs of the operating system, so like iOS, macOS, watchOS. And we also partner with the folks from our product design team. So very similar perhaps to your feature teams. They're the folks who are making our first-party apps like news and music and the website. And of course, we're having conversations all the time with people from engineering, accessibility, localization, and marketing. And this looks like a very perfect symmetrical circle, but quite honestly, our process is a lot more fluid than that, and there are actually a lot more lines and dots in this giant amorphous cloud of collaboration that kind of show where we're at. And the people that we work with and interact with changes throughout the year. But one thing that doesn't really change is our process. So before every major release, we basically sit down with the individuals in a lot of these teams, and we ask them why. Why did you design this feature this way? What is it going to serve people at the end of the day? Why did you add this accessibility feature? What does Swift UI mean for designers? How do designers, what should designers consider about app development? And we hear their perspectives on the usability and on the intention behind what they've designed, and we distill all of those points of view into the HIG. And one thing to mention also is that the HIG is really not the only thing that we do at this point. So it's probably like 10% of my job, and we do a lot of other things as folks in design evangelism. We work on things like the Apple Design Resources, which is our public component and template libraries that are available for all of our platforms. We also deliver SF Symbols, which is basically over 4,000 icons that you can customize and use in your UI. So if you haven't seen this as a resource, I use it almost every day. I think it's super powerful. We host design Q&As and office hours, as many of you do internally. And we do these through events that we put on throughout the year. And so actually, just to kind of plug this, the next one is next week. So if you wanted to chat remotely with anyone from my team, just look up Ask Apple and sign up. We also release design videos, and we do these through the events like WWDC in the fall and other events throughout the year. And we use this to supplement the written guidance that we have in the HIG, because we know that reading can be sort of a slog, and there are better ways of explaining some of these concepts to all you. And so these videos are so valuable for us. And if I could also just plug these two talks from last year, I love these two talks. So the first one is Design for Arabic, which is actually also available in Arabic. And it goes through localization of right-to-left languages in your user interfaces. And the second one below it is, what was it called? Designing an effective chart. And that goes into infographic design. So we just released like this fancy new component called charts. And it goes through all of like the fun stuff about how to design infographics that are accessible and usable by people. And so we have to serve a very large audience. Not only do we have kind of billions of users sort of using our design system, we also have a huge audience that's always growing for the HIG and our resources. So yes, we average around 18 million views on the HIG every year. We average around 4 million downloads of our resources every year. And that has become no small task to maintain. The content that we need to cover is an ever-growing list as our platforms develop, as the design process evolves, and our design guidance needs to evolve with it and with our point of view. So going back to this timeline, this time last year, we kind of reached a point where we felt like the HIG wasn't really communicating the current state of how we thought people should be approaching designing for our platforms. So historically, every time that we release new hardware, we've created an additional HIG to cover it. So Mac, iPhone, iPad, watch, TV, da-da-da-da-da. Now we're here today. So basically, we have like 4 independent HIGs that we needed to maintain. And again, context and time, at the time, that was totally okay. There were really enough differences across our platforms that warranted each one having their own guidance. And enough people were just telling us that, oh, I'm like really only designing for one platform at a time, so whatever. But what we've noticed internally is that this has been really changing over time. And I think one of the biggest drivers of this is when Apple released Swift and Swift UI for developers. So this is basically a code base where once you had to write like 4 different code bases, 4 different languages to support all the devices that we had. But now with Swift, you can kind of handle that under one code base. And so more people were designing cross-platform, more people were developing cross-platform, which translates into having more of a shared color system, having more of a shared type system, having more shared everything. And we were looking at the way that we were updating all of the guidance, and over the years, we kind of took a step back and said, wow, we are really repeating ourselves. Probably like everything that we had to say on a topic was almost 90% the same and 10% different per device. And so what we also heard from the design community at the time was, well, yeah, and that makes it really hard to compare what I actually need to pay attention to if I'm going to be designing for a watch or for a TV. So we did what every design team does, and we brainstormed and used Post-it notes, invented in 1977, and we did card sorting exercises. So we took the entirety of the HIG. I wish I had the panoramic picture because we actually took up all 4 walls. We would organize all of the content that we had, share it with the design team, organize it all again, share it with the engineering team. And eventually, after a year of redesigning and re-architecting, we landed in a place that we thought accurately represented the way that we think about things at Apple internally and how we want to see people approach design externally. And that does not involve prioritizing the platform. And I say that, and the first section is actually called platforms, but what we did here was that we converted these into more of getting started pages that really highlight the difference in the human factors and the use cases that you'll want to pay attention to. So if I want to put something, or not me, but if you want to put something on a TV, well, great. And then we want you to consider the fact that your users will be sitting 8 feet away from your interface and interacting with it indirectly with a TV remote, as opposed to an iPhone, where what we want you to consider is the fact that people are going to be on the go. They're going to be using it with one hand. They're going to be doing things that are distracting to them while using your app, and they want short and quick interactions. So these are the sorts of things that we covered in platforms now. Okay, cool. We also made foundations, patterns, and components. So a lot of this stuff we had existing, but what we did is consolidate all of that knowledge. And in the process of doing so, we actually managed to reduce the amount of words in the HIG by over 50,000. So you're welcome for less reading that you have to do. And even though we consolidated, we did add affordances that let people easily filter what exists or applies to one platform versus another. And at the bottom of every single topic that we go over, we also highlight the callouts for each different device in a place called Platform Considerations. And then finally, we made the sections called Inputs and Technologies because we really want people to use this stuff. It is all built into the system. These devices are really powerful. And so if you're curious about designing things that use the gyro or the accelerometer or use spatial audio or the Apple Pencil, we have design guidance on that. And if you're interested in seeing how technologies integrate into your designs, like augmented reality and machine learning, we have design guidelines on that. And so please check those out. We also have videos. That's my PSA on that. And then finally, we did a bunch of quality of life improvements that were based off of your feedback. So we added change logs, we improved search, and we tied all of the diaspora of technical documentation and videos and articles that we have all together in one place. And so that is really thanks to the community. You have all been very generous, maybe not like you personally, but the whole community has been very generous with feedback. They let us talk with them, interview them about the HIG, and we couldn't have done it without your input on how we can better support you. So that brings me to one of the most common questions about our guidance that I get. How strict are you at Apple? Do I need to follow the HIG to a T? And so hopefully through this talk that I've tried to make clear is that we really believe the HIG is a guide, not a law book. It evolves all the time. We're learning from you just as much as you're learning from us. And so we are not prescriptive on how you should consider it and implement it back into your designs. We are also trying to iterate on better ways to make experiences clearer or more intuitive or more inclusive. And if you take a look at a lot of the first-party apps that are on our devices, they really try to explore being tailored, branded experiences in their own right and tailored for their users. And they still feel cohesive with the platform. So to that end, we are very, very purposeful with our our language. So we will never say the word never, don't, always. We've pretty much scrubbed most of those words from the HIG. If they do exist, it's because there is an actual legal issue if you actually do what we say you shouldn't do. So instead, what we do is we say, try this. Avoid that. Consider this. And actually, one other word that I didn't put up here is that we don't try to say the word users. I know I've made that faux pas a bunch and probably in this presentation, but we call people people. We're very deliberate in that too, so you won't see us say the word user in a lot of our videos because we think it kind of dehumanizes the people who we're designing for. So that's just one other kind of side note that I wanted to add in there. But even if we're using very soft language, just keep in mind that when we make the suggestions that we do in the HIG, it's coming from the fact that we have the learnings and the experience from testing out all of these design patterns on our billions of users. So it's coming from a place of consideration, of thought, of validation, and at the end of the day, they're suggestions. So, for example, if you wanted to add a very ambiguous hamburger menu with a bunch of random stuff in it into your UI, I'm not going to stop you, but I'd love to suggest a better way for you to handle navigation in your app. Or if you don't label your tab bar, you're not going to get rejected from the App Store, but I can absolutely have a conversation with you about how your users are probably confused. So the key word for us is flexibility. I know that you all build flexibility and leeway into your design systems to support your feature teams and new ideas. We are the exact same way with the design systems that live on our platforms. We want you to explore, we want you to innovate, we want you to express your brand. And we also want you to take advantage of our system and make users feel at home on our platform. So as one final example, one team that I think does this so well is Headspace. They have really succeeded in bringing their brand identity over into our platforms through their color, their type, their illustrations, and their composition. And they still feel like they belong on an iPhone. And that's because they've made use of a lot of our system navigation patterns and components. And what that lets them do is take advantage of the features that we've built into the system to help people out. So things like dynamic type resizing for folks with bad vision, voice over screen reader support, and light and dark mode. So balance the platform with your intention. We really want you to believe in our design principles. We really want you to consider why we are suggesting certain design patterns to you. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we want you to do what's right for the people who are going to use your designs. So please prioritize your end user, end person at the end of the day, because that's what we're trying to do through the HIG. And talk with me. I am at Linda Dong in most places. I am basically here to listen, get your feedback, and be an advocate for you all for what you need from us. So, thank you.